my name is Monique Refutation, and today I'm going to be refuting Cyrus Shadaram's proposition. And his proposition was that the dismissal of climate change puts America and the world at risk for natural disasters and environmental disrepair. So one of his first points was that Donald Trump has dismissed climate change, and I'm going to be proving that this information is not sufficient enough to prove that climate change is being dismissed on a large enough scale to have impact on the world. His second claim was that climate change is putting us at risk from increasing amounts of storms and natural disasters, and this evidence is, I'm going to be proving that this evidence is inadequate to lead us to his claim, to support his claim. And his third piece of evidence was that the burning of fossil fuels and coal emit high levels of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and I'm going to show how this point lacks sufficient data and reliability. So I'm here today to prove that none of the evidence Cyrus presented is enough to lead us to support his claim that the dismissal of climate change puts America and the world at risk for natural disasters and environmental disrepair. So firstly, Cyrus shares a tweet from Donald Trump, which stated that the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. So this is not sufficient data to support his claim because this proves that Donald Trump does not believe in global warming, and the President of the United States does in fact believe that global warming is a hoax. However, Trump only sadly represents America, and just because he diminishes it or he dismisses it does not mean that the rest of the world does. For example, in 2016, Canada decided to contribute to global efforts by working with international partners to lead the world towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. This plan invests not only in Canada, but in vulnerable and developing countries as well. They endowed a $2 billion low-carbon economy trust fund to fund projects which reduce carbon waste. So although Trump plans to cut the Environmental Protection Agency spending by 31%, other nations such as Canada are still contributing to protecting the earth. Also, just because Trump, the President of the United States, dismisses climate change does not mean there are no laws and regulations already in place which restrict America from emitting large amounts of pollution. For example, the Clean Air Act has been in place since 1977 and has been updated as needed to regulate emissions of air pollutants to protect the environment as well as the citizens of America. Another example is the Toxic Substance Control Act, which is also in place to prevent hazardous chemicals from being disposed in places where they can cause pollution, just to name a few. Just to name a few of the regulations that are already in place in America. So first of all, Cyrus only provides us with one person who dismisses climate change, which is Trump. He never states in his claim that Trump is to blame for the dismissal of climate change, and because he never blames Trump in his proposition, this means that his proposition cannot be true. As I stated, Canada is not dismissing global warming, and neither is America. Although the president might not support global warming, legislation clearly proves otherwise by all the regulations and laws in place to prevent from pollution. His second point was that climate change is putting us at risk from increasing amounts of storms and natural disasters. This evidence is inadequate because he states that low temperature events are decreasing while high temperature events increase. However, he never tells us the significance of this information. We don't know how this will increase natural disasters. He never provides any other evidence. He just states that low temperature events are decreasing and high temperature events are increasing, so we don't understand the significance. He provides another random piece of evidence when he states that an increase of 70% of rainfall has occurred in the United States. But once again, no other information is provided. Thus, this information can be interpreted however the audience perceives it. His third claim was that thirdly, Cyrus stated that the burning of fossil fuels and coals has increased the concentration of carbon dioxide, which has increased the amount of storms and natural disasters. But he never provides any supporting data or statistics to prove that claim. This was a common theme throughout his speech. He makes a lot of claims without sufficient evidence, and this makes his evidence unreliable. This leaves most of his claims up for assumption amongst the audience, and there's no clarifications or clearly stated claims that show correlation to his main proposition. So in conclusion, the evidence provided is not enough to prove his claim that the dismissal of climate change puts America and the world at risk from natural disasters and environmental disrepair. He fails to prove how dismissing climate change will harm not only America but the world, and his claims lack data and significance, which is why I cannot support Cyrus's argument. Thank you.
All right, the claims are listed pretty clearly. The secondary issues are laid out well. On the first point, you basically challenge the relationship of Trump to whether or not there's going to be an impact on climate change activities or policies. You say that although he represents the country, that doesn't necessarily change what the rest of the world is doing. I think that that's a reasonable press there. You've got some good examples of other countries that are taking actions to address climate issues, particularly carbon releases. That's perfectly fine. I don't remember if the advocate talked about any of the policies that have changed as a result of the president speaking out on this or suggesting a different point of view or canceling any particular plan. Since any of those things aren't specified, I think that's one of the things that you want to point out, that the president says a lot of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of action that follows from those sorts of things. There might also be arguments that suggest some of the things that the president doesn't approve of wouldn't have made much of a difference anyway, but you never get that far. So I'm not sure that if we had a longer debate, that would probably come up as an issue. Oh, yeah, and like I said, you keep coming back to the notion that says that there's no reason that this means that restrictions don't exist, and you mentioned the Clean Air Act and the Toxic Substances Control Act that both address these kinds of issues. I think you need a little bit more information that shows how the EPA and the Toxic Control Group can manage these things or have been able to do something about those kinds of things, and how that's either that's not affected by any of Trump's actions or behaviors, or that it is going to continue to go in those directions. There are probably other examples that you could put here as well. So I thought it's a reasonable press here. There's a nice explanation about why Trump's opinion is mostly irrelevant to what the policies are going to be. I think that the advocate probably missed some important arguments on this, and as a result, you don't have to really refute them. On the second point, it's basically a challenge on what the evidence says that the advocate is claiming, and you challenge the sufficiency of the evidence to demonstrate the points that they are making. It might be true that we have a decrease in low temperature events and an increase in high temperature events. So what does that mean? What harm has occurred? What is the result? I think that that's a reasonable challenge to make. The only example that you say the advocate talks about is an increase in rainfall, and we're back to the same point. So why is that a bad thing? Who's affected by that? Why are we worried about this? That's a good press. I think there are probably a lot of arguments that could be made on some of the climate change issues that fit into this category. You don't get into it too heavily, but you don't have to, because the advocate didn't really develop a lot of those issues either. And then on the third point, you're back to the same criticism sort of that you had on the second point, and that is that there's not really a lot of supporting data that identifies the claims as being true here. You don't have any counter evidence on these particular points. That might have been something that would have been useful to add to the argument. All right, thank you.